Hello everyone and welcome to Blogging Theology, and today I am delighted to talk to Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you, Paul.
And welcome to London. We're both in this amazing hotel near an amazing park, so it's fantastic to see you in person for a change.
Thank you.
That's great, fantastic. For those who don't know, if there are any such people left in the world, Shaykh Hamza is an American Muslim scholar and co-founder of the Zaytuna College in Berkeley, California, the first accredited Muslim liberal arts college in the United States. He studied the Islamic sciences extensively in the Muslim world, particularly in Mauritania, the UAE and Morocco. He is a leading figure in the global Islamic revival and has translated and authored several influential works, including, one of my favourites, The Purification of the Heart, also The Creed of Imam al-Tahawi, and most recently, and this is the topic of today's podcast, the Hamziya of Imam al-Būṣīrī, an ode in the praise of the best of creation. And this is my copy of this most amazing book there, what I'll link to in the description below, inshallah. So I'll sort of read, if I may, just a few paragraphs from the introduction to this extraordinary poem that you have translated and you've written commentary on and you've written the introduction to in the book. And just want to read these words. After the Quran and the prophetic sayings, the highest level of eloquence any Arab aspires to achieve lies in poetry. Thus, poets in subsequent generations invariably expressed their love for the Prophet in marvels of verse that poured forth from their tongues and pens like pearls unbound. Among these, Imam al-Būṣīrī stands out as the most renowned. In stunning stanzas, the poem masterfully captures the beauty and perfection of the Prophet, his character, his virtues, his miracles, and salient events in his unparalleled and momentous life. And then you say in beautiful words, which I just want to stress, this is the quintessence of poetry, penetrating human insight that a real poet conveys through words powerful enough to reach another's ear, enabling the listener to realize the same insight. End quote. Very, very beautifully expressed yourself.
Thank you.
And I can completely identify reading poets back through the centuries and having this human heart-to-heart contact with them is a real pleasure, actually, one of the great pleasures of reading poetry. But anyway, back to our Imam al-Būṣīrī. When did he live and why did you translate this particular poem by him?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. First of all, it's very nice to meet you finally in person. I've seen several of your interviews, and I think you're doing really wonderful work to just help illuminate people in these dark times, different perspectives on the faith, and quite a broad spectrum also, because I think so many people look on Islam as this monolithic phenomenon, not realizing that it's a very nuanced religion that has a great deal of difference of opinion and beautifully honored by our great scholars, the idea of adab al-ikhtilaf, that we actually recognize human differences and human perception, that we're all filtering the world through our own backgrounds. In fact, the Arabic word for difference, which is khilaf, and ikhtilaf, the same word khalfiya, which means background, where you come from, what's your khalfiya. And so a lot of differences of opinion, if somebody grew up in very difficult circumstances, they have a very different view of the world than somebody who grew up in very privileged circumstances. So Imam al-Būṣīrī is probably one of the most, if not the most notable poet, scholar of the post-early period. I mean, there are some great scholars at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, poets, scholars like Hassan ibn Thabit, obviously. And I think he lived at the same time, interestingly enough, as St. Thomas Aquinas, who you're very familiar with. So that period is a very interesting period for both Christianity and Islam. It's also a period of the Crusades. So he's living during the time of the Crusades.
Yeah.
He actually dies the year after Palestine is liberated from the Crusaders. So he lived, he was 18 years old when Jerusalem was reconquered by the Crusaders after being liberated in 1187 by Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. So he sees it reconquered and then re-liberated. So it's a very interesting life. It was a period of a lot of dissension, not dissimilar to our own time. He lived in a time of a lot of disunity in the Muslim community. There was also great shakeups. The Mongol invasion was happening, so you had all these Central Asians that were coming down. The really interesting group of almost like Ronin. I called them Ronin-like people that come down, and they actually end up liberating Al-Quds, these Central Asian warriors. So it's a very fascinating time. He was interestingly enough, he was a scholar of comparative religion, which is unusual in our tradition. You do have, because the Quran deals with other religions, you do have scholars that did focus on comparative religion. Al-Biruni is a great example of that. Asfarayini, there are several.
Yeah. So why did you choose this particular poem? Because there's another more famous one.
The Burdah.
That I read about in your introduction. But you chose this much longer and less well-known
Well, I
poem.
did. I translated the Burdah and published it after 9/11. I think it was around 2002, maybe. The Burdah and the Hamziyah in the scholastic class, they're just quoted constantly. I mean, you just hear them quoted, especially
People memorize them.
They memorize them. Pretty much every student of knowledge in Mauritania knows at least the Burdah by heart.
Amazing.
And many of them know, if not the whole Hamziyah, they know large segments of the Hamziyah. In the Sus, which is in southern Morocco, where there's still a very strong what's called a mahdara tradition, because in Mauritania they have these mahadar, which we call madrasa. So they call them mahdara. In the Sus, they actually do a tasbih, which is they divide the Burdah and the Hamziyah into 7 parts, and they do it every morning and every evening. So they do the Hamziyah in the morning and the Burdah in the afternoon. After Maghrib. So they do the Hizb of Quran.
Right.
And so they'll finish the Quran entirely each month, but they'll do the Hamziyah and the Burdah, they'll do a khatam each week.
Amazing.
And that still goes on. They're like birds, they come together at Maghrib and Isha, at Maghrib and Fajr.
So, but the Hamziyah covers a vast number of topics, doesn't it? It's not say just about the Prophet's life. I mean, that obviously would be more than enough.
Sure.
But it is very operates on many different levels and many different focuses. So, what's going on there? Is it really expressing his encyclopedic knowledge, or what's his perspective?
You know, I think Imam al-Būṣīrī, he had a very obviously intense spiritual experience. He had, and I mentioned this in the introduction, he was, one of the things that many poets in the Arabic tradition did was they lived by their wits. So they would write poems for notable people, and then obviously we were at Dr. Johnson's house the other day, and one of, in his dictionary, he says a patron is a scoundrel who's paid in flattery. And so, you know, these poets had patrons, and I think he had a lot of regrets about having to do that.
Because apparently he did that as a younger person.
Exactly.
He created some of this poetry to flatter a ruler or a patron, and he bitterly repented of it
He
later
repented
on.
from it, but he did have a stroke, and he was healed while he was writing the Burdah. And he attributes the healing.
Tell us about that. Did he have a dream or a vision?
He had a dream. The Prophet ﷺ put his Burdah, which is something, it's still done. It's called Ilqa al-Khirqa, which is when a sheikh or a scholar, he puts a Burdah on. And so you see the shawl, like a lot of people wear the shawl. Right. That's the idea. That shawl is actually called a Burdah in Arabic. And so it was a very common thing for a sheikh to give the Burdah. So the Prophet ﷺ, when Ka'b ibn Zuhair wrote his famous Banat Su'ad, which is an amazing poem praising the Prophet ﷺ, but it's also about his divorce with Jahiliyyah. So Su'ad is a personification of Jahiliyyah. So he talks about divorcing Su'ad, this beautiful woman, and that he loved deeply, but he realizes that the relationship can't continue. And then he ends up praising the Prophet ﷺ. So that became a really one of the most important praise poems in that early period. But the mantle, the idea, the Prophet ﷺ, when he finished it, he actually gave Ka'b the mantle, this burdah, and it became a tradition.
Yeah. And he actually received healing through this.
He was healed. He woke up in the morning healed from it. Yeah, and these are confirmed karamat. So they're not things that are just. This isn't like hagiography that you find in a lot of traditions.
Embellished and stuff. No, this is verified. You say in the introduction, very interesting thing. The poetic lines of the Hamziya unfold in a highly stylized Arabic that uses many schemes and tropes that are characteristic of the Arabic rhetorical tradition. Now, that's a very, very sophisticated tradition. So how on earth do you approach a translation into English in light of these great challenges? Because is it thought for thought, or is it you can't have a literal translation, presumably?
Right. So George Steiner, who wrote After Babel, which is just about language and all the problems that are inherent in translation also. He mentions that translators invariably have to choose whether they will remain true to the idioms of the language that they're translating from, and therefore risking the chance of it sounding strange in the language they're translating into, or do they attempt to really make it natural in the language? So in my early period of translation, I think I adhered to that first school. But in the for some time now, I prefer the second school, which is trying to find the most. I'll give you an example. Dr. Cleary in his Quran translation. About Moses, it says, "Astakhaffa qawmuhu fa'ata'uhu." So if you look at that verse, it's a very difficult verse to translate, just because of the nature of istighfaf. What does that mean? But he translated. He made their people flippant, and so they went along with him, or they went along with it, and so. He could have said, and they obeyed him, but a lot of people don't associate obedience with willingness. They see it because in our English language we forget that obedience is always willing. Most people can see it as coercion. So he could have used obedience, but to say they went along with it is, I think, a much more natural way to convey that meaning. And then to say flippant, which is a type of, it's characterized by levity, and the word istighfaf means to make somebody light. So he found what Flaubert calls le mot juste, right? It's that perfect word, and I think for any translator, you're looking for le mot juste. You're looking for that word that is really going to get as close as possible to the intention of the author. And it takes a lot of time. It's very difficult. For me, I mean, I'm fortunate that I did get to study Latin and Greek, and so I tend to try to find words that have a similar meaning in the root systems. So those are the type of things I look for, because the root system in Arabic is really sophisticated. So it takes a lot of time. I mean, I spent many years on this. I spent many years on the Tahawiyya. I spent a lot of time on that and really worked. Just to give you a good example, in the Tahawiyya it uses the word wasa', which is kind of it's a very interesting word. But I use the word capacity because the Latin root for capacity is almost identical meaning to the Arabic root for wasa'. So those are the type of things that, somebody who obviously appreciates translation would appreciate those things, but most people I don't think will.
And it seems how close translation is to an art. It's not a mechanical something that AI could do. You know, we're dealing with something that is...
AI is getting pretty good at it. It's a little
really
scary. Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel that if things are headed the way I'm seeing them, because I've been watching these translation as a translator concerned about losing my purpose, I actually do see translators increasingly becoming editors. Because I do think it's getting incredibly sophisticated, and I'm seeing it in the Arabic and also in Persian. But we'll see. I think my own experience with reading AI-generated things is that there's something missing.
Absolutely.
I don't know what it is. I feel it. Even the generated images, there's something just very hollow.
It's very numb and
soulless.
And sterile and soulless. Exactly.
I think it is soulless.
Yes, that's a good word, actually. Yeah, I really get that sense. And there's something slightly off-putting about it after a while. You get used to the kind of feel of it, and it's plastic, soulless, and no, thank you. And that is a nice segue, actually, into another quote from your introduction.
But I will, before we do that, I think one of the things, the tradition that he was working is a bidiyat. So traditional Arabic rhetoric is a very, very well developed, because the traditional position of the scholars was the Quran was a rhetorical miracle, that it had reached a level of rhetorical prowess that was inimitable by human convention, which is why in Shaykh Muhammad al-Yaqubi's introduction he says that, setting aside the Quran and the Hadith, which can't be imitated, the highest aspiration for an Arab in eloquence is poetry. So the Badi'iyat tradition, which is Safiuddin al-Hilli, really kind of starts this tradition, which came out of Imam al-Būṣīrī's Burdah, actually. And so the Badi'iyat is used, the Mimiyya. And these, Badi' is the third aspect of Arabic rhetoric, because they divide rhetoric into these three areas, which one deals with schemes, and then you look at, so schemes would be the sentence structures, like to be or not to be is a scheme, right? Or ask not what you can do for, what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. That's a classic type of scheme in the sentence structure. And then you have like isti'ara, you have majaz, these type, what we call metonymy, synecdoche, these type of rhetorical tropes where you use metaphor. He's a lion. I mean, he's not literally a lion, but obviously it conveys something about his courage, or Richard the Lion-Hearted. So translating these from Arabic is not always easy, because they have a very different, although there are many areas that are similar. So antithesis, for instance, what we call tibaq, like when you do opposites, sama and ard, which is very common in the Quran. You can do those type of things, but then they have a lot of puns, they have a lot of word plays. The Arab poets love wordplay. And those are very, I mean, I actually, in the notes, I say, this is lost in translation.
It's like Shakespeare's often, it puns his way through his plays.
Constantly.
Which often are quite unfashionable by today's standards.
Get thee to a punnery, right? Because the nunnery was it was a house of ill repute.
So you say in your introduction, the elegance and eloquence of the language can only be compared to the finest examples of English poetry found in the works of William Shakespeare, John Donne, John Milton, and Martin Lings. And it's nice to see an Englishman, Martin Lings, included in this august list. Now, I mean, I've read his extraordinary biography, The Prophet Muhammad Upon Him Be Peace, which is a marvel of English prose. And I can't help thinking, if it wasn't for the subject matter of that book,
that was my father's opinion.
That particular biography would be one of the great classics of English literature.
You know, it's funny you say that, because my father said the identical thing. My father, who was a Shakespearean scholar, and incredible knowledge of English poetry, he read that book and he told me, if this was on any other subject, this would be regarded as a classic of English literature.
But we were talking before we started the film that Martin Lings was a poet, and I didn't really know that. And you're encouraging me to read
He has
poetry.
A beautiful diwan, and he writes in the vein of John Donne. He's a metaphysical poet. I think he would have probably been recognized as a much greater poet had he written in a more like Auden or Frost, who are using, very finely crafted poetry, but in our more modern idiom.
Yeah. No, it's extraordinary. So I think I might just actually, if I may, read some verses in English from your translation. Now I'm going to read from verse 218 onwards to 235, and from a particular section which you've headed "Refuting Christians and Judaists." Perhaps you can explain what that means as well. But you are very critical in your introduction about some aspects of this poem, the particular way the poet assails Jews and Christians.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd use the word critical. I mean, you obviously read it, so I think that's a fair subjective reading from you, but I think what I was really trying to do was to defend him.
Right. Oh, I see. Yes. Yeah. You do contextualize.
I was contextualizing it, and I was also
Crusades at the time,
and also the whole tradition of invective. Because the Arabs have this tradition of hija, which it really is to make fun of other people. And in fact, there was a great hajjah. These are the people that do it. There was a great one at the time of Sayyidina Umar's Khilafah that he actually had him locked up because he was just creating so much havoc. Because Arabs celebrated the birth of a poet, the Jahili Arabs, because they could elevate a tribe, but they could also abase other tribes. Like the worst thing that could happen to a tribe was another poet attacked it, because poetry was like TikTok today in the Arab Peninsula. It would just go viral.
Well, you might remind me, if I may bring it down to a much lower level, I saw Trump recently complaining about CNN's coverage of a certain thing he did, which we won't go into, and he was saying, "Oh, I have to watch this." I'm thinking, you have to watch CNN? I thought you'd be above that. So clearly he is a bit affected by this coverage. So it's like the kind of modern version of the opposition's poetry, the opposition's political commentary is something that he takes seriously, and clearly he's very upset about it.
Well, these are ancient. We forget the essential nature of our species doesn't change.
True.
The Roman graffiti, Caesar sucks, down with Caesar, it's all there. So,
okay, well, I'm going to indulge myself by reading some of your translation, say from verse 218 onwards. So it begins. Tell us then, O people of these two sacred books, whence the Trinity or the Mizvot's immutability? Neither book brought these two doctrines. So tenets without proof remain baseless claims. And claims, if you can't produce any compelling proofs, are like bastards with claims of parentage. Would that I knew if this talk of 3 and 1 rendered your reckoning subtraction or addition. How can you declare the singularity of God when one generation after another negates oneness? A composite deity? We never heard of a God whose essence is composite or complex. Obviously hasn't read Aquinas. Does each of them possess a portion of dominion? Why then doesn't each show its distinction apart? If so, do you think they have needs or necessities to mix their parts, and yet they don't transgress? Was the Godhead riding on the donkey? If so, how helpless is a God who wearies from a walk? Or, I can't help laughing, this is quite funny. Or were all three on the donkey? What a mighty ass that moves so well when bearing them all. The word ass has different meaning in English to American English, I think. We're not going to go there. Or is someone other than those three God? What then is Jesus' relation to that one? Or do you define the three as attributes? Why limit them to 3 or even 2? Or is Jesus the Son of God, whose sonhood is a mystery no other prophets proclaimed? According to you, the Judaists killed Jesus, and yet he restored your dead to life. These words you've unleashed against God, exalted be his name, are just plain prattle. Likewise, the Judaists' claim of no change. Each statement entails a horrid assent. And I'm not go on. It goes on and on.
Yeah, it gets worse.
It gets worse. Now this is actually the mild bit.
That's the mild part. Yeah,
and then it gets worse.
Yeah. So you know, first of all, I tried in the essay, the introductory essay, to contextualize the time he was writing in. They were under siege. His own country, Egypt, was under siege during the period of the Fifth Crusade. Dimyata was actually captured by the Crusaders. There's a remarkable Sultan Kamil who's really quite something. He actually, during a time when they ran out of food, he actually sent food to the Crusader army, and they were pretty overwhelmed with that. You know,
amazing.
And he ended up meeting Saint Francis and embracing him. And Francis is a very enigmatic character, I think, in Christianity, because if you go to Assisi, I don't know, have you ever been there?
No.
Yeah, it's a beautiful town. But anyway, what I was struck, because I did visit Assisi, and what I was really struck by was that there's no crosses in Assisi, because he turned the cross into a tau, a Hebrew tau. So it's a T. And I just wonder about why he did that. But so that's the Assisian cross. So the Franciscans have this cross that isn't a cross. It's a T. And I don't know if it was for Tawheed or, but he, in any case, he was writing these lines, and I think the reason I chose, well, first of all, what's extraordinary is how accurate they are.
Yeah.
In terms of the theology,
like they're biting, but they are to the point.
They're very accurate. They're accurate, like the immutability of the mitzvot. Like they believe that there's no abrogation, whereas he says, you know, hold on, there's clearly abrogation. How even just the changing the ram, replacing the ram, right? So he says that's a type of abrogation. If he told him to sacrifice his son. And he actually has Isaac as the Ishaq, as the son, which was an early opinion. A lot of scholars held to that. Imam Ali was of that opinion. Yeah, so it's the Quran leaves it ambiguous, and I think the later, what they call the verifiers, the muhaqqiqun, consider it Ismail, because from the famous hadith, the Prophet said, "Ana ibnu dhabihain," I'm the son of two sacrifices. In any case. I chose Judaist because, I struggle with these lines a lot. There's 66 of them in the poem. And, you and I both come from backgrounds where we obviously have Christians in our family. I actually have also my sister married into a Jewish family, so I have Jewish nieces and nephews. And so... for me, I think about how people are going to respond to these. And I think the Prophet ﷺ was very sensitive about these things. He pretty much did not speak to one of his wives after she called Sophia a Jewess. He was very upset about that. He also, when Sophia, he found her weeping because some of the wives had said, she was a Jewess. And he said, go and tell them that your father is Aaron, that your uncle is Moses, and your prophet, your husband is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was almost like go and boast to them. This is not something to be ashamed of, that they're children of prophets. So the reason I chose Judaist is because when I translated as Jew, the problem with Jew is that it's both a religious designation and an ethnic designation. Although there is debate, DNA and all this, I don't want to get into that about who's actually ethnically Jewish, because there are theories about the convert theories being Turkic people, and then I think in the Ashkenazi there's a lot less Middle Eastern DNA than there's much more European DNA. But and that's true for like the Ashraf. Like if you go to India, if one of these people who's a Qurayshi or a Husseini, or if they do their DNA, they're like 96% Indian, right? But they do very often have Arab DNA, but it's small, but it's still, I mean, I had a friend of mine from Arabia who said to me, you know, these Ashraf, they say, oh, we're Ashraf. He said, they probably have like 1% of the DNA. And I said, for you to say that means you don't know who the Prophet ﷺ was. Just to have 1%. You know, so, yeah, that's 0.00001%. I'll take that. So I chose Judaism because it separates the ethnic from the religious. Yeah. And I personally think, especially in our world, people have a right to criticize, you know, these truth claims. Like if you have a truth claim that says you're superior because of your ethnicity, I think people have a right to if in Hinduism, you know, if you're a Shudra or a Dalit, and I mean, and you want to criticize the Varna system of India, people should have a right to do that without being called, you know, some kind of, you know, bigot or a racial slur. Like, I don't think you're an anti-Semite if you're not comfortable with Judaism, because there are many Jewish people that don't like the religion of Judaism. Many Jewish people. I mean, Shaykh Israel is a good example, who wrote a scathing critique of Judaism. So, but at the same time, we have to be very careful, because race is, I mean, there's a whole argument, there's a huge can of worms to open up that debate, but the bodies that we're ensouled in, this is God's doing, and we're guests in these bodies, and we eventually leave these bodies. And I think there's a hadith in al-Būṣīrī where the Prophet ﷺ saw a Jewish man being taken to his grave, and he stood up for it. And this was a time when there was animosity between the Jews and the Muslims, and the man said, you know, it's a Yehudi, ya Rasulullah, it's a Jew. In other words, it's a Judaist, right? Somebody who adheres to Judaism. And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I feel like I can hear the tone that he said it. He said, "Walaysat nafsa," you know, isn't it a human soul? In other words, whatever, when we die, we're just stripped of this mortal coil, right? And we're just a soul going back to our Lord. And I think people tend to forget that. You know, but for the grace of God go I. I mean, you can see all these people out there, and you can feel contempt for them. But in the end of the day, you know, you were ensouled in your body. They were ensouled in their body. Their circumstances judge so much of how they view the world, how they perceive the world. I mean, I feel grateful I wasn't raised in some family that just hated other people. And I was raised by a woman who thought that racism was a kind of stupid thing. It was idiotic to judge people by the color of their skin or by something incidental to their humanity. But if I was raised in a white supremacist family, I don't know, would I have those beliefs? I mean, it's very difficult because it determines so much how you grow up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I want to move on to anticipate some common objections, actually, to this particular poem. Some Muslims, especially those aligned with perhaps more conservative theological views, might raise objections to the Hamza. And these objections might typically stem from concerns about the perceived exaggeration in the praise of the Prophet Muhammad, because there are many lines. I haven't read the whole poem, but I've read a lot of it. There are many lines in the poem which lavish extraordinary praise on the Prophet, and critics might argue that such praise borders on shirk or even deification, especially when divine-like attributes are ascribed to him, so the argument might go, such as knowledge of the unseen and him being the light of all creation. And they might well, these critics might well mention a hadith in Bukhari where the Prophet, upon him be peace, says, "Do not exaggerate in praising me as the Christians praise the Son of Mary. I am but a servant, so say, the servant of Allah and his messenger." So this, I can anticipate that there will be this kind of criticism of the kind of language that might be used in the poem.
You know, you preface that by saying people have a more conservative theological view. I'd say the opposite. These are more modernist views. The people that, I mean, Imam al-Būṣīrī was recognized and his poems, there's so many commentaries by great scholars. I mean, Ibn Hajar al-Haytami alone is one of the great scholars of Islam, and how could he miss something so obvious as shirk if there were shirk in these poems? These are all misreadings of the poems. The hadith, which is a sahih hadith, as you pointed out, لا تطروني كما أطرت النصارى عيسى بن مريم. Do not, إطراء is to go beyond the bounds. Right. And he meant kama, as the Christians did to Jesus. Well, what did they do to Jesus? They deified him. Mm-hmm. One of the miracles of this religion is that the Prophet was never deified. There's no sect in the history of, there's a sect that actually deified Ali ibn Abi Talib. Indeed. And there's no sect that deified the Prophet, right. Which is a miracle, because the Prophet said, لا تجعلني وثنا من بعدي يعبد من بعدي. Do not make me an idol that's worshipped after me. And so the fact that the Muslims never worshipped the Prophet ﷺ is one of the great miracles of that dua, because it was clearly answered for him. I mean, the fact that they worship Ali, but they don't worship the Prophet ﷺ is just amazing. So I think those are just misreadings. Part of it is not knowing rhetoric. In fact, Shaykh Ibrahim al-Yaqubi and many others, but Shaykh Ibrahim al-Yaqubi said most of the problems in Islamic theology came out of not knowing rhetoric. The Arabs, for instance, use omission. Hadf is a very common rhetorical trope. It's used in the Quran. Fas'al al-qarya, ask the village. Well, you can't ask a village literally, but it meant فَسَلُوا أَهْلَ الْقَرْيَةِ, ask the people of the village. So oftentimes when Imam al-Būṣīrī makes an oath, أَقْسَمْتُ بِالْقَمْرِ الْمُنْشَقِّ, I swear by the moon, he means بِرَبِّ الْقَمَرِ, and this is clarified in the commentaries. So there are many examples of just misreadings. But I don't know. I mean, all the scholars, I once asked one of the greatest scholars that I studied with, Shaykh Biyya wal-Salik, who was Allah yarhamuhu, he was a qadi, but he also mastered the madhabs. He really was an incredible faqih and an Arabic scholar. And I asked him about Imam al-Būṣīrī. I said, why do people, have a hard time with him? And he said, ma'andum dhawq. He says, it's just a lack of aesthetics. They don't appreciate what he's doing. And I think he meant by that also just not knowing rhetoric and how language functions. But I have probably on the Burdah alone maybe about 30 commentaries. Wow. And I look at them and none of them say, this is shirk. And they're actually, there's a recent one by a great Indian scholar who wrote an extensive introduction refuting all those claims from people, and they're very strong. So I just don't see how you could, the Burdah was once around the entire hujra of the Prophet. How could all those ulama see that and that there's shirk in it? It doesn't make sense. There's still a line there on the door of Fatima from the Burdah. That's still there. هو الحبيب الذي ترجى شفاعته لكل هول من الأهوال مقتحم. He's the beloved. And also knowledge of the unseen. How do we know about Munkar and Nakir if we don't know the Prophet? His knowledge is not God's knowledge, and that's clear. And there are some ghulat, there are some extremist sects of Islam that might go to extremes. But I don't believe that you can call them like mushrik or that they worship, because nobody will say the Prophet is God. Nobody would dare say that. No Muslim would dare say that. But he did have knowledge of we only know about the lawh from the Prophet ﷺ. He is the vehicle by which God gave us knowledge about these unseen things. He also was obviously shown many things about the future because he has prophecies. So he knew something of the unseen. That's undeniable. To say that he has God's knowledge, that you can equate his knowledge with God's knowledge, that would be totally unacceptable to any Muslim. Also, to say that he's the light of creation, he is. Even Ibn Taymiyyah says when he was asked about is that lawla Muhammad ma khuliqa al-kawn, had it not been for Muhammad, the creation wouldn't have come into existence. You know, he says from one perspective that is an.
I think as a former, I think you were a Christian a long time ago.
I was raised Orthodox.
Yeah, and so was I. I'm not Orthodox, but and you know, we're both familiar with John's Gospel, where the words are put on Jesus' lips: "I am the light of the world." Yeah. Now we know from scholarship, Christian scholarship, now that Jesus almost certainly didn't say that. Yeah. Historical Jesus, that is.
But he was the light of that world.
But it is used by Christians to, in some way, affirm his divinity, along with other verses in John. Yeah. Now, and I know I'm not making a logical argument here. I'm making a kind of it echoes in my mind from the past as a Christian, when that language, being the light of the world, was used of Jesus, who was made into a God, as you say. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that language is, therefore, must have that role with Muhammad.
But they believe he's eternal. We believe the prophets created. Light there's created light.
Yeah.
I mean, the sun is created. Even when Allah says, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard, all the tafsirs say munawwiru. He's the one who enlightens. It doesn't say he's the light of the heavens and the earth. All the commentaries, they say munawwiru samawati, the one who enlightens. So the Prophet ﷺ is a light. Ja'akum nurun min rabbikum, a light has come from your Lord. So the Prophet is the light of God in the world. He brought us out of darkness. This is how Allah brought our species out of darkness. لِيُخْرِجْكُم مِّنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ, to bring them out of darknesses, plural, to the light, which is the guidance. So the Prophet is guidance. And the Prophet ﷺ, you know, Allah has, theologically, Allah has created attributes, but he also, uncreated attributes, but he also has created attributes. So the world is a created attribute of God. He has made it a manifest expression of his qudra and his ilm. And that's how we know God. The word in Arabic for the world is alam, which means in the Arabic language, it's called a noun of instrument. It's a noun of instrument. Like khatam is a seal. It's the instrument by which you seal. Alam is the instrument by which you know. What do you know from the world? You know the Lord, that this world has a creator. But Allah is not the creation. The Prophet ﷺ is a created being. He is makhluq. He's a creator, creation. He's not a creator. He's a creation of God. And so any Muslim with even just an ounce of understanding knows that the Prophet is not God. And to associate the Prophet with God is shirk, to say that, but to say that he's not a light, I mean, that's an abuse of reality, because he is a light that came into the world to illumine our hearts and to illumine the world. I mean, he is a light. And in fact, even all these, the mathematical sciences that came out of his ummah is what physically has given our world light. So even so much of the incredible achievements of Western civilization, without the Arabic numerals, without the Arabic sciences that came in and including coffee, that came in and stimulated the intellects of the Europeans, I mean, most of these physical achievements wouldn't have even been possible. So the Prophet ﷺ, I mean, is the source of so much goodness, not the ultimate source. And that's another problem, because in Arabic you have what's called majaz, mursal. You know, there's a type of, like if we say the Prophet ﷺ is, Allah says, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ, you don't guide to whom you please. Allah guides, but Allah also says, تَهْدِي إِلَى الصِّرَاطِ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ, you guide to a straight path. If you don't make those distinctions, which are the role of scholars to educate people about these things, then you can fall into these kind of stupidities. That's true, but these distinctions are very important distinctions, and most people don't study these things. They don't educate themselves, and that's why you have to find scholars that you trust and follow them. But there are a lot of misguided people, and religion is, religion can become a very terrible thing in the world when you have this type of arrogation where you're speaking on the behalf of God. I mean, Muslims traditionally were very humble about their views. Allahu a'lam, Allah knows best. Even at the end of every fatwa, it's Allah wa Rasuluhu a'lam, Allah and His Messenger would, because the Messenger could answer that question, Allahu a'lam, Allah knows best. Even the Sahaba, when they were asked questions, they would say to the Prophet, Allahu wa Rasuluhu a'lam, Allah and His Prophet know better. There's a type of humility and this kind of arrogation of knowledge that you're speaking on behalf of God. I mean, I would mention yesterday in Cambridge that Malik, if he was asked a question, he used to say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He would use the formula of calamity if he was asked a question about religion. And people are so quick to make these judgments about people and about religion and about what's ultimate reality. And, you know, it's just, people just humbled themselves. But I don't know any Muslims that worship the Prophet Muhammad. I've never met a Muslim that worships the Prophet Muhammad. I've met Muslims that believe in tawassul, which there are many, many scholars that permitted that. There are other ones that did not. The tawassul with actions is certainly permitted. You can ask Allah by your actions. But to say that they're a mushrik, because I can say to you, I can make tawassul with you. I say, Paul, would you please make dua for me? Yeah. And so the argument, you know, is that the Prophet ﷺ can intercede for that person. But the idea that the Prophet is the one forgiving them, I don't know any Muslim that believes that. I don't know any Muslim that believes that. But these are khilaf issues historically in the Muslim world, and the beauty of our religion and the way that, you know, the religion is to bring hearts together, to bind people. It's for ta'lif. It's not for to make people hate each other. You know, it's just having compassion for human beings. You know how hard it is to live in this world, right? I mean, you're a human being, I'm a human being. This is a difficult place for people. It's not an easy place. There's people suffering all over. I mean, really suffering. And there's billionaires that suffer, this idea the rich don't suffer. There's billionaires that suffer, and there's the poorest people that suffer. And then there's poor people. I lived with some of the happiest people in the world, and they were the poorest people. But in terms of their inner lives, they were rich people. So I look at this place, and my central understanding of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is that he was a mercy. He was a mercy. And I see a lot of Muslims just losing that understanding. There's a lot of cruelty. And
that's true. That's true. I've noticed that. Online as well as
it's terrible.
Offline.
Online. I mean, the way people speak to other people and just attack other people. And these are all, you're going to be asked about all these things. You know, the Prophet ﷺ said, طُوبَى لِمَنْ شَغَلَتْهُ عُيُوبُهُ عَنْ عُيُوبِ غَيْرِهِ. There's a tree in paradise for the one who is preoccupied with his own faults, on the faults of others. You know, like I have enough of my own faults. You know, people can preoccupy themselves with other people's faults, but I have enough faults of my own. I'd like to get out of this dunya with as few as possible, you know, because it takes a lot of time just to work on oneself. But I think there's not enough time in the world really to do that, especially in this age of distraction. But I'm just amazed at how much, I mean, people are obsessed with other people, with, you know, groups and attacking, and I don't know. My understanding of Islam is that it's a religion of brotherhood, of husn al-dhan, having a good opinion of other people. The Prophet said that a believer makes 70 excuses for his brother. And a hypocrite, he goes right to the faults. You know, Imam Shafi'i, one of the most beautiful lines of Imam Shafi'i, he said, وَعِنُ رِضَاءً كُلِّ عَيْبٍ كَلِيلَةٌ, that the eye of contentment doesn't see any faults.
I remember some years ago with a Muslim friend, we were walking down Edgware Road, there's a big road in central London, and there's a betting shop there. It was obviously haram for Muslims, and there was a sister, looked like a Muslim sister, wearing a hijab, in a betting, working there. And whenever me and my friend passed, we always used to go into that mode of finding excuses. And we came out with lots of reasons why she might be there. You know, looking for it, instead of judging her, haram's haram, you know, it's obviously bad what she's doing. We thought, well, maybe this, you know, maybe she's absolutely desperate, maybe there's this situation, maybe she doesn't know it's haram, maybe this, maybe that. We were quite creative.
She might be finding that there's an opinion in the Hanafi madhab that it's not haram in the lands of Dar al-Harb.
So we came up with, and it became comical in the end, because we were thinking more fantastic reasons. But behind it was a serious exercise in actually finding excuses based on that teaching, which is an Islamic principle. And so it was quite edifying, although it became quite ridiculous in the end.
You know, the husn al-dhan is an amazing thing, and just having a good opinion. خصلتani, the two qualities in the hadith. It says حسن الظن بالله ثم بالعباد, to have a good opinion of God and a good opinion of His servants. And it's a good practice. They said about Imam al-Ma'ziri that he was so knowledgeable, he rarely found a fault in anybody's religion, because he would always say, oh, maybe he's on the opinion of so-and-so. Maybe he's following, the weak opinion of so-and-so. Yeah. And another thing in our tradition that people forget, that the mujma' alayh is the only thing that you can make, you can actually make inkar of. So in other words, those things that are agreed upon by all the scholars, that you can attack and say, like alcohol, nobody says alcohol or fornication or anything. But what's mukhtalaf fihi, you're supposed to withhold judgment if there's a valid difference of opinion about it.
And necessity dictates exceptions.
That's another thing. That's overused, I think, a lot of people. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think a lot of people overuse that. But it is true. Al-darurat tabih al-mahdhurat, the necessities permit what would normally be impermissible.
Yeah, so eating pork, for example.
Yeah. Well, if you look at Russia could be Muslim today had a wise faqih gone up there, because when the pagan Russian ruler was debating which religion to adopt, he brought a Jew and he asked him, where the Jews resided. He said, we're dispersed around the world. He said, why? He said, because God's angry with us. He said, no, I don't want to join a religion where God's angry. And then he brought the Muslim, and the Muslim started explaining Islam, and he said, you can't drink alcohol. And he said, no, this is Russia. Like it's freezing up here. We need vodka. And he said, I'm not going to accept that. When the Christian came, he said, oh, God forgives all your sins. So he said, this sounds good. But the thing about that, there was a very wonderful Pakistani man in England many years ago that I met called Colonel Rahim, Ata Rahim. He wrote Jesus, Prophet of Islam. And I met him many years ago in the 70s, when I was living in Little Venice. But he had an Englishman who was smoking a cigar and drinking his brandy, and he said, I love your religion, I can't bring myself to leave my cigars and brandy. and Colonel Rahim said, sir, don't let that stop you. Many Muslims drink brandy and smoke cigars. Which
is true, but...
but the point is, it's like, let people come into Islam, open the doors. The Prophet's like, there was an alcoholic in Medina. Abdullah, they gave him the laqab of al-Himar. He's in al-Būṣīrī, and he used to get whipped for drink. And one day, one of them cursed him.
Yes, that's right.
And the Prophet ﷺ said, "La tal'anhu, فوالله ما علمت منه إلا أنه يحب الله ورسوله." I don't know anything except he loves Allah and His Messenger. He was an alcoholic. He was in tribulation, and that's the difference. Is that and that's why Islam spread by these people that went with this kind of. It's not that we're non-judgmental. We have to, judgment is very important in life, but just recognizing human frailty and that human beings are fragile creatures. رِفْقًا بِالْقَوَارِيرِ يَا أَنْجَشَى. The Prophet said, go easy on the brittle ones, meaning the women. People are brittle, and this world will wear people down. It breaks people,
Gosh, okay. Well, that's fascinating. I think perhaps it's a good place to leave it. I just want to finally comment that not only is the poem a treasure in its original and it's in translation, but the actual book, the physical book itself, is very beautiful. There's the gold lining on the outside of the pages, and you probably can't see this, but that was
all done by hand, the original.
Really?
Yeah, it's all hand done.
So the
calligraphy is by hand, Iraqi calligrapher.
And the beautiful
the illumination.
Page illumination. Yeah. So it's a real pleasure to
Thank you.
To hold and as well as to read, and often that's not the case with books today. Often they can be manufactured.
I'm a believer in just the preservation of books. I don't think a book should be written or published if it's not worth the ages. There's a lot of books that don't last even a publishing cycle.
Yes.
And I'm very much against perfect binding, the kind of, because they fall apart.
Yes.
So this is stitch bound.
Right.
And I also, one of my favorite hadiths is, Inna Allah kataba al-ihsana ala kulli shay'in. Allah has prescribed ihsan, excellence, virtue, beauty, making of beauty. It's a difficult word to really get, you know, to nail down. But that Allah has prescribed ihsan in everything. So there should be ihsan in everything.
Yeah, you've done that with this book. So I'll link to it in the description below so people can get their copies. So this book, I understand, is available in the UK, is that right? And in the United States?
Yeah, it's available through Abu Zahra publications in the UK, and then through Sandala in the United States. And it was printed in Turkey. So
right. Right, so I'll put several links
in
the
description
love. Below. Yeah. A labour of love, yes, it's clearly that. So, well, yep, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, very nice meeting you, and I wish you, inshallah, all the success and tawfiq in your endeavours too.
Inshallah, thank you very much, and safe travels back to the new world, inshallah.